solicitor, and I've dedicated my life representing children and adults with special educational needs, and I head one of the country's largest education law teams in Wales and in London. So we are very proud to do what we do, and today's talk is going to be on whether the Welsh Government is meeting the further educational needs of young people with learning disabilities. And let's just start by looking at what the Welsh Government say. They say that people with learning difficulties are the most vulnerable people in society, and that the government is absolutely committed to improving their lives. And I want you to think about that, because I'm going to come back to this, because I'm going to take you through some statistics following a Freedom of Information request that I made to the Welsh Government in relation to meeting the further educational needs of young people beyond school. And we see under Section 33 of the Learning and Skills Act that the Welsh ministers must actually encourage individuals to undergo post-16 education and training. Remember that too, because the words are to encourage. Why is it important? Well, we all know why it's important. If we meet the educational needs of young people, we go on to permit their ability to have greater access to learning, a greater chance of realizing potential, greater chance of independence, and we all know it's so important, the greater chance of employability. We take many of these things often for granted, but when one has a disability, these things cannot be taken for granted, and I know that not just in my experience as an education lawyer, but as a parent of a child who has had his own issues, let's say. The Learning and Skills Act obliges the Welsh Government to make provision available to young people between the ages of 16 and 19 and beyond. The obligation is to make reasonable facilities available for those who need it. And that is what's known in law as a target obligation, which is an objective that the Welsh Government really must follow. Please keep that in your mind. I'm going to come back to it when we go back through the statistics, and the penny will drop eventually. And Section 140, it empowers the Welsh Government to commission an assessment of young people who have learning difficulties, but who hold a statement of special educational needs. Now, many of you will know what a statement of special educational needs is, but for those who do not, a statement is a legal document that affords a guarantee to the individual to have the provision that's set out within that statement met. It's important because it describes the young person. It must describe the young person properly, accurately, fully, and it must also reflect the young person's needs by making provision within that document that is sufficiently specific so that we can be absolutely clear what the local authority in that instance should provide. And it's important, it's extremely important in fact, because you will often see that young people with disabilities, if we take autism for example, you would ordinarily like to see expertise on the ground in the teaching, and you would want to see support to manage what is often a sensory issue that young people have. And that might be in the form of sensory integration therapy. It may be reducing the stimulation in the environment, reducing distractions, maybe small classes, and it will see undoubtedly a lot of speech therapy support. And if your statement is accurately recorded, you will see, and you would want to see in there, some specific support for speech therapy, etc. If it's not, it's a vague description, it's very difficult then to sue under And for example, if you were to go to a court and argue that your speech therapy is not being delivered because the statement is not being complied with, and the wording within the statement describes that the person should have access to speech therapy, that's not the same as actually having 1 hour of speech therapy a week. And so the judge might say, your statement is not specific enough. It's important, I'll come back to it, but the obligation to provide support to young people beyond the age of 16 and 19 is guaranteed, if you like, through section 140, but only if you have held a statement. And that's extremely important. So who does this assessment? Because the Learning and Skills Assessment is supposed to be a document that is similar to a statement and provides support for that young person's transition into further education and ultimately into adult life. And you will see that in the case of statements, you will see a number of experts who are ordinarily involved in the drafting of that statement. They will include, for example, an educational psychologist, a medical expert, a therapist, a speech therapist perhaps. If the child has got a sensory impairment, you'll see an expert in that area, maybe visual, maybe auditory. And all of those expert opinions are brought together and recorded within the statement. But in the case of a Section 140 assessment, the obligation to undertake that assessment is upon the Welsh Government, and they use the Careers Wales Service. And what's interesting is that the Careers Wales Service appoint an officer who has a qualification in careers advice, and they are to compile that information and work on what that young person might require later in life. There's a lot of case law about what that assessment should do, and broadly it should describe the young person's needs, it should set out the placement where that young person will receive their education, and it can't be hypothetical provision. So it has to be provision that's available in the real world. So vague words that you see in a statement often transfer later into the person's life through the 140 assessment. And what's interesting in the guidance issued by the Welsh Government about what one should do when undertaking that assessment, you don't really involve an educational psychologist, which some might be surprised to learn. An educational psychologist, according to the Welsh Government, is only used in exceptional circumstances. So in practice, what I would say in this instance is to be absolutely sure that if you require a statement, get it. And get it before you leave school, and make sure that the statement accurately describes the young person. So what do the statistics tell us? In Wales, there are 105,625 young people who have special educational needs in school. Out of those, only 12,895 have a statement. And that's quite a significant number. And we see it there, broken down into regions. The number of young people who are on School Action Plus, School Action and statements is all there recorded. So it's a small number of those who actually get a statement. And I would say, in practice, in 26 years of practicing special educational needs, I don't think I've ever seen a statement that I've regarded as lawful. So in other words, I don't think I've ever seen a statement that's ever come to me that hasn't passed by either one of my colleagues' desks or my own desk, whereupon I've been able to say that that statement is specific enough. So what we are actually seeing in practice is that this number is a lot less when it comes to describing the young person, the needs of that young person. And what does that do? Well, the foundation is you get a Section 140 assessment, careers advisor compiling the information and taking that forward. A lack of specificity. and there is a danger, particularly in the autism community. How do England compare? Well, interesting this, because there are 1,276,000 people at school with special educational needs, and of those 253,000 hold a statement, or an education healthcare plan, it should be, it's referred to now. And in percentage terms, that's 20% as compared to only 12% in Wales. So we have more people in England getting their legal entitlement than we do in Wales. And yet, if you look at the Welsh population as a proportion to the English, the population of young people with disabilities in Wales is greater than it is in England. So that really is a more significant gap. And if you translate that into numbers, 8% difference equates to 8,411 young people. Now just think of that as a number. That's more than all the people here at this event today. It can fill a quarter of a stadium of young people whose needs have not been recorded. It's breathtaking, I think. But what do the statistics say about SEN pupils entering further education? Well, we already know that if you get a bad statement, you get a bad 140 assessment. And there are approximately 7,544 young people, between that number and 8,000 of young people with special educational needs in every school year in Wales. And of those, around 1,900, call it 1,000, leave school each year having held a statement. Remember those figures, because I'm now going to take you through how many of those young people get what they're entitled to following my freedom of information request to the Welsh Government. And here we have it. Of those people who go on to receive specialist help from the age of 16, we see only, in 2015 to 16, only 118, I beg your pardon, young people go on to make a request, and only 107 have had their request granted in that particular year. And in 2016, there's a slight reduction in the number of requests, 108 to 104 that were granted. And in 2017 and 18, 116, although all of those were granted. And of a percentage of those with special educational needs, all of whom have held a statement, we see the percentage numbers of those who go on to get specialist entitlement beyond their school. And that's, remember, it's a percentage of the percentage that is already small. So we've got 12%, 11% getting granted in 2015 to 16, 11.3% in 16 and 17, and 12.6% in 17 and 18. Now, I don't know whether you are like me, but I find that quite staggering. It's staggering for a number of reasons, because we've heard what the Welsh Government have said about their commitments. In terms of staying on those figures, if you look at it as a percentage of the entire SEN population in Wales, it represents 1.5%. 1.5%. 1.5 children in every 100 go on to get their needs met in further educational colleges, specialist further educational colleges. 1.5%. But that's not the end of the story, I'm afraid. Sorry to say. I'm being with bad news today, because I'm now going to take you through what that percentage of people get. So let's see. The duration of the courses that are permitted. This is very interesting. In 2015 to 16, of that small percent, most of the population applied for and obtained a 3-year course. You see that, 60, representing 50% of that group. And in year 16 and 17, we see a drop. It went down from 16 for 3 years to 23, but we have 74 granted 2 years. And then in 17 and 18, what a drop! Heavens, 97 people get a 2-year course, and only 17 get a 3-year course. Now remember this too, I want you to think of these figures here. For the ages of 21, 22, 23, important figures. 0, 0, 0, pretty much zeros right across the board here, lots of zeros. So your better chance of getting the support is here, when you're in that age group, than it is when you're older. Because if you look at that as a percentage, it's obviously extremely tiny. So there's a clear reduction in the number of specialist places given. We know that, 1.5% of the SEN population. And there's an even smaller number that go on to get a 3-year course. Why? Well, by stealth, the Welsh Government introduced this guidance. It's entitled Securing Provision for Young People with Learning Difficulties. And I'd like you to pay attention to certain paragraphs of that guidance. This is the guidance they've issued to itself, to those who produce plans, and for those who are responsible for funding. We see that provision at mainstream FE establishments usually span 2 academic years, they say, but accordingly the Welsh Government will generally fund placements within a specialist FE college lasting up to a maximum of 2 academic years, because the mainstream population has 2 years. So we should give special needs population 2 years, because that's all they're entitled to. And the Welsh Government should not receive an application, not even an application, for a programme of study lasting for more than 2 years, unless exceptional reasons apply. Now, remember this, because then we see at the bottom, and a request to extend a young person's placement beyond the programme's original agreed end date will only be agreed in exceptional circumstances. Well, what went wrong? I mean, before, we had 60 people getting 3-year courses, and it drops. Only in exceptional circumstances can you get that. I am going to give you some good news. Because the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunals Wales Act is the new legislation that is going to come in toward the end of 2020, which will give IDPs to everyone who have special needs to the age of 25. Good thing. Question, of course, will be whether or not it's going to be accurate or specific enough, and a question mark remains on whether or not that's a sensible obligation to before schools having to draft. But we're going to see, generally, I think broadly, it's a good thing that we're going to see more people with recorded needs. But I wanted to remind you about those statistics, and I brought you back to the slide of what the Welsh Government say. And in its explanatory note, when the Learning and Skills Act was passed, in the explanatory note, it said that the purpose of this legislation, when Parliament passed it, was to recognise that people with special educational needs need more time. People with special needs might need a longer period of time to complete a course. And what we see back in the guidance is that they compare it to people without special educational needs. They don't need extra time, so we don't give them to the special needs population either. So, but what's happened to the explanatory note? What's happened to the obligation? The obligation of recognising that those people with special needs are the most vulnerable. What's happened to that? And Section 33 of the Learning and Skills Act, as we said, is to encourage education. And let me just tell you very quickly about the Welsh Government's efforts to encourage. I've just represented a young man with very profound difficulties. He had a mental health breakdown at the age of 22, and he couldn't really cope with education at all, but he eventually found, albeit belatedly, a wonderful placement later in his life, at the age of 23 or so, 22, 23. And that placement regulated him, calmed him down, and did some wonderful things with him. And found out this year, at the age of 24, that he had much more capability than was ever first determined. That young man turned to the Welsh Government in the last few months of the period within which he can ask for a Section 140 assessment and said, now that I have my mental health difficulty met and I'm now regulated and I'm able to, and all the teachers around me have seen what I can do, can I please have a Section 140 renewed assessment? That's what they said? What do you think? No. Now remember, this young man has got a few months left within which he can ask for a Section 140 assessment. Only a few months. And I have to try and resolve that case and potentially take it to the High Court, all within a few months. And I intend to embarrass the Welsh Government when I do so. Because if I don't do it, he will never get the right to even a Section 140 assessment because it will expire at the age of 25. And if I don't do it, that young man will never have the potential to go on. Yet, at the same time, we have to recognise that people with special needs we hear should be encouraged to go on. I ask yourself, common sense, you don't have to be a lawyer. Do you think that that young man who has nowhere to go at all, he's been told no education is available for him at all, he's been denied a Section 140 assessment, how is that encouraging him? Concluding thoughts, in 2017 and 18, 13 young people secured a further year of study from a 2-year course, which represents 0.7% of the average yearly SEN population of the people in Wales. Isn't that shocking? What more can be done? Well, I suppose what we can do about it is to raise awareness. It's not all the government's fault. The fault actually partially lies with us. We just don't know enough. We don't know our rights. We're told things on the street and we take it for granted that what's being said on the street is right. And we say, oh, well, statements don't exist in Wales anymore and we can't get more than 2 years, so we just give Jonathan, Jessica, 2 years of study. Oh, but what about resits? Well, the SEN population can't do resits because they only get 2 years. It's extraordinary. Frankly, I think it's a disgrace. And I would go as far as to say that it's a lost generation. We are failing our young people. And the Welsh Government should look at the last few years with a heavy, heavy heart. They have failed the young people of Wales. And they are continually failing if you don't recognise that those young people need a little more time. That, like someone passing a GCSE, they're entitled to another year to go on to school. But the people with SEN, we just see can't. We take for granted that we just get GCSEs and we pass and we can do okay with that. But the SEN population some of them just want to live a normal life. They want to get a job. They want to do the things that we take for granted. They want to be independent. They're entitled to get a chance. They're entitled to get a reset. And the law entitles it. But the Welsh Government, at the moment, in practice, is not delivering it. So much more needs to be done. And we are seeing, through the ALN Act, that things are going to improve, I'm sure. But I'm afraid, at the moment, we see these appalling figures. And you might say, well, if you have a young person between the ages of 16 and 25, you might with a heavy heart, conclude that you've got comparable chances to winning bingo, or maybe the lottery, to get him the right support, him or her the right support. And in my firm, where we are committed to representing those with special needs, what I would do is just tell you to look out on our website. There's information there. Don't take information that you hear on the street. Don't accept it. Don't listen to it. Get proper advice if you are ever concerned. Because the law says something different so often, and yet in practice we see a different thing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.